Hi, it's the Quirky Book Sisters. We're back.
Episode 2.
We're going to talk about sex in YA. It's been, I think, a pretty hot button issue, or topic at least, over the last several years. And we started talking about it because we noticed there's been a big change since when we were younger and reading those like older teen books from the 90s to now.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think I read much sex back in the old days.
Now, I heard, like all the books that we talked a little bit about our favorite YA books in our last episode, I remember like the Christopher Pike books, which are big ones I read when I was a kid. Um, L.J. Smith, all those books. There was a lot of kissing.
That was it.
That was it. And I mean, I think that I don't even really remember sex ever being really talked about too much in the books, and maybe in some of the racier ones is alluded to, but it really didn't make it into the pages of YA back then.
It wasn't something I needed either as a teenager.
I mean, I was young reading, I was like 12 reading Gerald's Game by Stephen King, so I'd read sex, so I guess it just, wasn't looking for it, but if I read it in another book, it didn't bother me, but when I was reading YA, I wasn't, needing it either.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because in preparation for this show, I did, some searching online just to see what other people were talking about, and I came across this one blog called deliciouslyfictitious.com, and it's by an Aussie journalist and writer, and it's interesting because she actually does real interviews with publishers and teenagers, and one of her articles is Sex in Young Adult Fiction, How Far is Too Far? And one of the publishers she spoke to said, I believe it was Lauren Harris from Penguin Group in Australia, said it's about whether it moves the story along. Is it relevant to those characters? Does it feel real? And is it well written? If sex is true to the characters, you need to have it there. You shouldn't avoid it. But I think you need to be aware that less is more in all these cases, and I think you have a certain responsibility to not be flippant about things of which teens have a wide variety of experience. I think that is a really good assessment of whether or not to put sex into YA books these days,
Yeah, I agree. So I think that the first time I read really racy passages was in this book I read, probably 6 years ago, called Leftovers by, I think, Laura Weiss. And it's about these two teenage girls, and the one comes from a broken home, and the other one comes from, her family has good jobs, but they don't really pay attention to her. And they're both, they go to parties where they're, putting different colored lipsticks on and giving blowjobs, and it's like they turn off the lights, and the guy with the most blowjobs at the end and who can pick which girl did it kind of wins or something. And I remember being horrified by this when I'm reading it, and I was like, oh my God, is this really happening in schools nowadays? And I couldn't believe that it was actually in a young adult book, but for the certain book that it was pretty relevant to the whole storytelling, because the one girl's getting abused by her brother's friend, sexually abused by her brother's friends. So there was a lot of stuff about sexual abuse going on. I just had never read something so detailed before in a young adult book. But when you look at so we were talking about Twilight, which I think for paranormal was one of the first times I'd seen sex actually even alluded to.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when it was such a mass audience readership, it was surprising that was in there. And of course, for me, the fact that she was a Mormon in her personal life, I was surprised.
The author,
that she would even include that.
And of course, Bella gets pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
So this is
at
another
19.
Yeah.
Or 18, 19? How old was she? 17? I can't remember.
Well, she had just graduated high school, so she was 18.
Okay.
But the this this series, I think the first one's the Goddess Test series. Is the Goddess Test series? That's what it is.
What's it called? I can't see the title.
This one's called The Goddess Inheritance.
Ah.
The first one's the Goddess Test. This is by Amy Carter. I mean, there's sex. I mean, it's light. There's sex in there, and she gets pregnant too, and she lives in the underworld. And she's a teenager. She's kind of ripped out of high school to go live in the underworld. So there's that. But I think that the most graphic one I read more recently was the House of Night series, where in like the first one, Chosen, I know that there's talk about like giving blowjobs and stuff, which I was like, what? What? This isn't young adult? Like, I just was so surprised. And then, I mean, this is a while ago, but it's obviously these are the first ones that made impressions on me. And then there was like this one where the main character, Mark, actually has like an affair with her professor, and there is a sex scene. I mean, it's not totally graphic, but there's, talking about the nudity and the caressing and a lot of other stuff.
I think that was the one thing is like
I mixed them up. This is the first one. This is the second
one. Like you and I were talking about earlier, when you're reading Twilight, the scenes that are sexual are not. There's no graphicness at all. It's more of like, oh, this just happened, but there's no.
Well, I would say that this one is considered more graphic because it talks about them lying on top of each other and him taking her and licking her and sucking her and cutting her breast to drink from it. They're vampires.
Right, but like Twilight, you don't get any of that.
No, in Twilight you don't. But this is young adult, and then I think that was one of the more.
Oh, right, the ones you're saying.
It was more. It was much more graphic than I'd ever. I mean, I guess I must have taken a break at some point from one generation of YA to the next.
I feel the same way. I'm like, have I not been reading YA lately?
Yeah, I don't know. It was like, I think like Twilight was kind of like a segue between the two, and then like next thing you know, sex is everywhere in YA. So you had a couple of books you were going to talk about, like the Duff. You said.
Well, it's interesting. I picked up the Duff because I never had heard of it, but then the Hollywood made a movie out of it, and I was like, well, that looks kind of interesting, kind of funny, so I picked it up. YA, not thinking there'd be any sex or anything in it. This thing is loaded with it. It's like half the book is about sex, and for not having read a lot of graphicness in YA, I was really surprised that this was in YA, in a YA book, and that it had become so popular. And there are some passages I just, they're tame. They're tame compared to other stuff, but for YA, they're kind of racy. Let's see. So it's kind of like a build-up, and I'll just go through them. All my thoughts vanished. I became sort of a physical being. Emotions disappeared. Nothing existed but our bodies, and our warring lips were at the center of everything. That's fine. That's, normal. Yeah. So then, this one says, I was fully conscious of Wesley's hand as it slid up my torso and moved to cut my breast. Okay, getting a little bit more heated. A second later, I was straddling him, and we were kissing again. His fingers undid the clasp of my bra, and it joined my shirt on the floor. Let's see. But his mouth pressed into mine again, and that tiny fleeting thought died. I'm just jumping around from little passages, just so you're aware. Acting on instinct, I pulled on Wesley's lower lip with my teeth, and he moaned quietly. His hands moved over my ribs, sending chills up my spine. Before I could come up with any answers, Wesley had my jeans and underwear off. Let's see. He pulled a condom. Let's see. He pulled a condom from his pocket. Okay, now that I'm thinking about it, who keeps condoms in their pockets? She does like a little funny thing. All of a sudden, we were having sex, and my thoughts were muted again. And then I'm building up to where it gets like where. Okay. Okay, this is where I was shocked. I was like, wow, I can't believe this is in YA. She goes, I bit my lip to keep from gasping as Wesley's fingers slipped to places that made my knees shake. He's fingering her.
Yeah.
Wesley
Yeah,
bit
obviously.
Wesley bit my earlobe and pushed my jeans even lower with his free hand as the other continued to make me shiver. This is pretty racy
Yeah.
for being for YA.
Yeah.
I think Mom would have chucked it out the door if I had been a teenager reading that.
Yeah, but she didn't really ever monitor
No,
what we're reading.
but if she knew, she would have. Because that's pretty graphic for. I mean, I was shocked. I was reading it and I was like, this is a YA book? How is this a YA book? I was like, this is more like adult.
Well, that's the thing. I think it's just so much more. I mean, and in a sense, it's more realistic. I mean,
Oh,
teenagers are
yeah,
having sex. I
sure.
mean, to kind of try to sugarcoat everything in YA when these kids are reading these books and they know, well, my life isn't really like this, then,
Yeah.
I guess you have teenagers nowadays that are, you're going to lose them if you don't have books that actually, like, are reflective of their actual life.
Yeah, well, that's interesting that you say that, because back to the article that I read online, the author talks about how she interviewed children. She interviewed like 13-year-olds and 16-year-olds, and the 13-year-olds were basically saying that kissing was all that they needed, the few that she interviewed. They didn't need more than that. Whereas the 16-year-olds were saying um, it needed to be relevant to the story.
Right.
So if it was a fast-paced story, they didn't, kissing was fine. But if there's a lot more downtime, they're hanging out at somebody's house or something, it's a slower moving book, they expected there to be more physical intimacy between the characters. And so you see, as they're getting older, they want more, but
Right,
at
of
the
course,
same
which makes
time,
sense. Yeah.
they're rational about it. They don't just want it in there for no reason.
Yeah, and well, I mean, I also read that it's more expected in like romances,
Yeah.
obviously, because it's more, around that. Well, see, I struggle as a writer because, as you know, Fractured Dream has a sex scene in it, and I never really wrote it for YA, but it kind of got slotted into that. And now when I have parents ask me if it's okay for their teenager, I'm like, I mean, there's only one sex scene, but I don't know. I have a hard time saying, yeah, it's fine, even though at my age, reading that, or not, when I was that age, it would have been nothing for me.
Well, right, but it
But
depends. It depends on the parent.
different. It depends on the parents. It depends on the kid because different kids have different levels of maturity
Yeah.
in what they're reading.
Yeah.
So, it's hard to, and it's hard to, who, where I don't know. It's just hard to define where, what age is the right age for sex to really begin for
Yeah.
kids in books.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think from what we've read for the most part, around 15 or 16 is kind of where publishers are more okay with it if it's
Which makes
relevant.
sense. Yeah.
Right. And then there's different publishers, different authors, different writers. There's kind of a divide between, okay, there's the sex, but now you're getting into the rape scenes and the sexual molestations or something. What age group is appropriate to introduce those concepts?
Yeah.
And I think it's hard. It depends on the book and it depends on what the author is trying to achieve. But, I did read that, and I think I agree with this, that if it is a rape scene, it should not be very detailed.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
keep it as ungraphic as possible.
Yeah. Tame it down.
Yeah.
Doesn't need to traumatize anyone.
No, right.
I mean, the thing is funny is because I've read like chick lit before that has no sex scenes in it, and chick lit's all centered around usually romance, but then you have the teenage books that it's very much centered around, but
Well, I mean, I still read plenty of young adult that doesn't have sex in it,
yeah,
but it seems like more and more a lot of the popular fiction or that's becoming that you're hearing about, that you're seeing on the shelves that are being heavily promoted, whenever I pick them up, I seem to be kind of shocked by how much sex is in them. I still enjoy the books. I loved The Duff. The Duff was an awesome book. I just was really surprised at how much sex was in there.
It's
for
becoming
that
much
age
more
group.
prevalent. Yeah,
So,
much more prevalent.
a lot different from when I was young.
I know.
You just get excited if there's a little kiss.
I know. Well, I mean, there were times when I wish there was more in
Yeah, but
YA when I was a kid, but I don't know if it bothered me so much. There were certain stories that were like the love story was like, oh, I wish they would go a little bit further, but
yeah.
when you were a teenager, but they never did.
Well, if it was relevant, like I've read some books where people put sex into them that are young adult or meant for adults, and it's unnecessary and it feels wrong.
Yeah,
Like it just doesn't fit. And it's like, well, you really didn't need to go that far.
right.
It could have just been a kiss or, you know,
Or
some,
pages and pages of it.
or, yeah. And it's graphic and it's
I'm
kind of
done.
raw and it's like, no, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, well, for anyone who, I mean, for anyone who's really, really like plot driven, too much sex is always going to be like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. There are people that enjoy it.
Go
They
read
really
eroticism
like
if that's what you
but
want.
what?
Go read eroticism if that's what
Erotica, yeah.
yeah, erotic.
Erotica is for the sex.
Yeah.
But I mean, almost like in regular fantasy, if we go out of young adult and we look at adult books, I mean, there was always a sex scene or two within them.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, but it was never like over the top.
No, no.
I mean, this was for the Duff. It was relevant to the story. She was kind of spiraling out of control, and she found herself kind of within this guy, and it was relevant and it was good, and I didn't mind it. I liked it, but I was just surprised,
Yeah.
So
Oh, yeah, definitely.
it's shocking these days, and I don't know if I had a 16-year-old daughter if I would. I don't know. I suppose I'd be okay with it, but at the same time, it would depend on the child, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you have to make that call depending on the kid. Like I said, when I was that age, I mean, I don't know. I was reading all sorts of sexual stuff.
Yeah.
Like I read Gerald's Game when I was really young, and I remember one of our aunts was mortified to hear that I'd read it. I was quite young, so. But, So anyways, if anyone wants to sound off on their experiences with sex and YA and what you think about it, because I have ran into some people, I've seen bloggers before get really upset about sex in YA. Younger bloggers, but still get really upset about it. But then you have a whole faction of teens that love these books with the sex in it. So there is definitely a line between.
Oh, there's a divide, definitely.
There's a divide, yeah. There's a divide that it's not completely accepted.
Yeah.
Even you were saying that before you were saying that there's publishers that.
Yeah, there's publishers that
publish it.
won't do it, and then there are publishers that will do it, depending, they won't turn a book away just because it has sex. They just, they need to know what context it's in and why it's in there.
Yeah.
But they say, often cut a lot of the parts that are sexual. And from this blog, they said, she had a quote from one of the publishers. Oh, they said they cut a lot of the sex scenes out of YA books because it's poorly written or cringeworthy. But they say that the sexual content won't affect the decision to publish it if it's authentic.
Yeah, well, that's. It's just.
I mean, that's one publisher.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to look into how publishers were dealing with it back, like in the 90s, when this whole faction of books were coming out. They had it was basically like non-existent.
Yeah.
It just was just at the time where the rules must have been different. They must have just been putting all stop, no sex. All they do is kiss in these books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there were books that existed that had like a person was raped or something that were for why I think it was Go Ask Alice was a really popular.
Yeah, it was a big one, but yeah.
That had she was raped in the book, but overall there wasn't.
Not in story, yeah, not in the stories I was reading anyway.
No, not for me either. But yeah, it would be interesting to hear if other people had.
What was the kind of guideline for it back then? We'll have to look into that and maybe make a new episode on what it was like in the 90s for publishers, or interview a publisher. That would be fun. Or talk to somebody who's been in the business for that.
When did it change?
Yeah, yeah. Anyways, for our next episode, we will actually be having an author guest who will be talking about kick-ass female characters in books.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
What's the author's name?
Jamie Benningfield.
Okay.
And she just had a new release called The Highly Capable.
Oh, it's exciting.
Yeah. It'll be exciting to have her discuss the theme with us next time.
All right. Well, thank you for watching us, and we hope you will communicate with us on what you thought of what we had to say, and if you have
Leave
any
comments.
thoughts, yeah,
Tell us.
comments. Share your thoughts. We'd like to hear them.
All right. See you later.
Bye.